Perfect. I want to move Amendment 4, which deletes the requirement for 13 weeks continuous employment before being entitled to sick pay. This was one of the most problematic aspects of the bill as drafted. There is a government amendment which I'll come to in a second.
Sorry, that's on the point of order. Deputy Murphy is making a very important point and I can't hear him. Yeah, well, it would be great if we could.
Washe the hele pakki of lan chapten on in with the clishton.
Damien.
Will she brain it? Morgan. Landeray.
Thank you, Lass. Thank you, Deputy Reardon. The issue here being that a very gross discrimination was created by the government's proposal, whereby if you had your service interrupted, you went back to zero, lost your rights, and so on. Lost your rights to sick pay, and then had to go back and get the 13 weeks again, which meant that the bill, as drafted, excluded many of the most vulnerable workers the government claims to be trying to protect, those people who were under the most pressure to go to work even if they're sick and so on, and they were left in a situation where they were going to be excluded. Congress in particular pointed out the impact it would have on women and migrant workers in particular. They wrote to yourself, I think Patricia King wrote to you, Taoiseach, pointing out, quote, "It will leave hundreds of thousands of mostly women and foreign-born essential workers employed in low-pay jobs who routinely have their service broken by their employer without coverage for 3 months each year." A very good case study of this, it would be childcare workers, 98% female, let go over the summer holidays, rehired in September, and who would therefore be without the entitlement to sick pay for the first 13 weeks when they're back in September. So obviously the government has an amendment, and presumably the Taoiseach will motivate it now, and it does go some way to addressing the issue, but I don't think it goes all the way. My reading of the government's amendment number 7 is that it will deal with the past period of employment, i.e. the period of employment before the current one where the need for sick pay arises. But my understanding from reading it, I'm interested if the Taoiseach could correct me if I'm wrong, is that it wouldn't include any period before that. So if you've done 10 weeks previously, you come back within the 26-week period, you do another 3 weeks, then from the government's point of view, if you pass Amendment 7, they would be entitled. That's a step forward. But my understanding is that if you had done, let's say you worked 3 weeks this time, 5 weeks the week before, and you had a previous break before that, and you worked 5 weeks prior to that, that would not be taken into account. Because obviously, so this would deal with the situation of the hypothetical childcare worker, because that's a big block of work, followed by a break, followed by another big block of work. But there are other workers who have their service broken continually, who therefore may be accumulating the 13 weeks, not in one period of time that then is broken and another period of time, but in smaller pieces. And as far as I can tell, the government's amendment would not deal with that situation. And the other situation that it wouldn't deal with is just forget about just the situation of, okay, the question of contract workers, people's terms being service being broken and so on, but just the basic point, you should be entitled. It's a basic right. There's a basic public health need for this. Actually, the right for it should apply from day one, regardless. I think that is a basic point that definitely the government's amendment does not address. So I am interested in the Taoiseach's response to that point about whether previous periods of service prior to the immediately previous one, if you understand, would be included or not.
Sure. At committee stage on the bill, Minister English signalled our intention to move an amendment to report stage. The purpose of the amendment was to eliminate uncertainty as to the entitlement of certain workers to sick leave. Section 5 is linked to the Minimum Notice and Terms of Employment Act 1973, and that means an employee will not have to qualify again for sick leave merely because they're regularly laid off over the summer period. We're well aware this would be a significant issue in some sectors, particularly, as has been mentioned, for workers in creche and childcare settings, many of whom work on a term time pattern. Where an employee is laid off, that does not constitute a break in service, and their service is continuous for the purpose of the bill. The issue was discussed extensively in the House at second stage, again in committee, and also with the unions and employers under leave. Deputies have rightly identified the risk that certain workers would have to re-qualify for statutory sick leave on a regular basis if they worked on term time contracts, and there is a break between contracts as distinct from routine layoff. Amendment 4 would delete subsections 5 and 6 and would appear to confer an entitlement to sick leave from the beginning of an employment. We think it is reasonable that an employee should have worked for an employer for some time in order to qualify for paid sick leave and to have established an employer-employee relationship with them. So, for example, if an employer was taking somebody on in the summer maybe to work in a shop or a restaurant for a few weeks, it wouldn't be fair if they took 10 days sick leave at the start of it and only worked maybe then for a week or two after that. So, for example, in the case of parental leave, parents must have completed 1 year's service with the employer before they can take parental leave. And we think it is important to allow sufficient time to establish an employee-employer relationship, and that's why we can't support the amendment. I am advised that it's not the case that there would be a reset for every service interruption, and this wasn't the case under the bill. So I'm informed that Deputy Murphy's point is mistaken, and every period of service is added together. Minimum Notice and Terms of Employment Act covers this, and the amendment will also cover multiple periods of employment or multiple breaks in employment.
Yeah, maybe just to zone in on that. So the wording is, where an employee ceases to be the employee of an employer and not more than 26 weeks after the date of cessor, the employee again becomes the employee of the employer. The period of service of that employee with that employer before that date of cessor shall be deemed to be continuous with the period of service of that employee with that employer after again becoming such employee. You're saying definitively that that does not just cover the term of period of service immediately prior to the current term, but any service prior within any previous service would be counted towards the 13 weeks. Is that what the Minister is, or Taoiseach is saying?
Yes, is a short answer, provided there's no break longer than 26 weeks. But I will double check, and if I'm wrong about it,
okay. I mean that would go a very long way to addressing that main substantial point.
It's not the most elegant.
It's a hard thing to read out. Thanks.